On the night of July 14th, 1881, inside a dark room at old Fort Sumner, New Mexico, Billy the Kid walked into the final moment of his life without knowing who was waiting for him. According to Pat Garrett's account, Billy entered the room where Garrett was speaking with Pete Maxwell, asked in Spanish who was there, and before he could understand the danger around him, Garrett fired. Billy the Kid was dead, but the greatest myth about the kid didn't die with him. It was only getting started. For generations, people repeated that Billy the Kid killed 21 men, one for every year of his life. The number became attached to his name until it felt like a fact. The reality is far more complicated. Billy almost certainly never killed 21 men, and historians still debate the exact number because some incidents remain disputed or depend on how responsibility is counted. So how did an orphaned teenager with almost nothing become the most famous outlaw in American history? The real Billy the Kid was neither the innocent folk hero of old Western stories nor the unstoppable killer created by myth. He was Henry McCarty, a poor and displaced teenager who grew up in a world where violence, money, and power often decided who survived. He was shaped by that world, but he was not simply a victim of it. He made his own choices, participated in killings, and continued down a path that eventually ended with a bullet in a dark room at Fort Sumner. Before he became Billy the Kid, almost nobody would have remembered his name. Henry McCarty was probably born in New York in 1859, although many details of his early life remain uncertain. After his family moved west, his mother Catherine became his main source of stability. When she died from tuberculosis while Henry was still a teenager, that stability disappeared, and without realizing it, he was about to step into a world that rarely gave anyone a second chance. The Southwest he entered was a harsh place. Small settlements were separated by miles of open land. Ranches competed for control, and law enforcement often depended on whoever had the most influence. For young men without family, money, or connections, survival could mean moving from one opportunity to another and staying ahead of trouble, but not in the way most people imagine. Henry eventually took different names, most famously William H. Bonney. He worked around ranches and frontier communities, but his reputation was not created by gunfights at first. It was created by running. And it worked, just not for very long. He was arrested for theft, escaped custody, and became a fugitive. In a territory where crossing into another town could make someone disappear, avoiding consequences was often easier than facing them. But every escape pushed him deeper into a life he could not easily leave. In 1877, while living in Arizona, Billy became involved in a confrontation with Frank Windy Cahill, an older man who was physically larger and known for his aggressive behavior. During the fight, Cahill forced Billy to the ground, but Billy managed to draw a weapon and shoot him. Cahill died the following day. The circumstances remain debated. Some believe Billy may have acted in self-defense, but a coroner's jury nevertheless ruled the shooting criminal and unjustifiable, although he was never brought to trial because he fled. That single decision changed the rest of his life. It sent him toward New Mexico, where a much larger conflict was already forming. The Lincoln County War was not simply a feud between cowboys, it was a battle over money, trade, contracts, and political control. Powerful merchants and ranchers fought for influence, and law enforcement often became another weapon in that struggle. Billy found himself working for John Tunstall, an English rancher who challenged the established economic power in Lincoln County. For a brief moment, Billy had something close to stability. He had work, allies, and a place in a community. Then, in February 1878, Tunstall was murdered by men connected to the opposing side. That death changed everything. Billy and other Tunstall supporters became members of the Regulators, a deputized posse initially granted legal authority to arrest those believed responsible. This is where Billy's story becomes far more complicated than the legend. He entered the Lincoln County War carrying the authority of the law, but on the frontier, the line between justice and revenge could disappear quickly. The Regulators began with the goal of making arrests, but as more people were killed, the conflict became personal. Retaliation replaced the legal process, and both sides began using the idea of justice to justify their actions. In April 1878, Billy and other Regulators ambushed Sheriff William Brady and Deputy George Hindman in Lincoln. Both men were killed. After that moment, Billy was no longer just a young ranch worker caught in someone else's conflict. He had become one of the most recognizable faces of the violence. There was no going back. He was not the leader of the entire Lincoln County War, but his age, reputation, and willingness to fight made him unforgettable. The war reached its military climax in July 1878 when the 5-day battle erupted in the town of Lincoln. Billy, Alexander McSween, and their allies were surrounded for days. Gunfire filled the streets, and eventually McSween's house was set on fire. Billy escaped through the chaos. McSween and several others did not. With their defeat, Billy lost the protection he once had. He entered the conflict as a teenager working for a rancher. He left it as a wanted fugitive with no employer, no political support, and no safe place to return. For a short time, Billy tried to escape his situation another way. In 1879, he negotiated with New Mexico Governor Lew Wallace, agreeing to provide testimony about another killing connected to the conflict. Billy believed cooperation could lead to a pardon, although the exact details of Wallace's promise remained disputed. He gave his testimony. The pardon never came. Whatever chance he had left disappeared with it. Feeling betrayed, Billy returned to life on the run, stealing cattle and moving through the same violent world that had helped create him. In January 1880, Billy shot and killed Joe Grant during a confrontation in a Fort Sumner saloon. The incident added another documented killing to his record and showed that his involvement in violence had continued well beyond the Lincoln County War. By then, his name had become larger than the person himself. Newspapers began turning him into a symbol. Some saw a dangerous criminal who deserved punishment. Others saw a young outlaw standing against powerful men who controlled the territory. The truth was somewhere in between. Billy was shaped by violence, but he also chose violence. Pat Garrett was elected sheriff with the goal of bringing Billy and his associates under control. During the pursuit, Billy's companions Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Boder were killed. Eventually, Billy and several others were captured at Stinking Springs. He was tried for the murder of Sheriff Brady, convicted, and sentenced to hang. But the story was not finished. On April 28, 1881, Billy escaped from the Lincoln courthouse while waiting for execution. During the escape, deputies James Bell and Robert Ollinger were killed. The exact details of how Billy obtained a weapon remain uncertain, but the result is clear. He was no longer simply a young outlaw caught in a complicated political war. He was a convicted prisoner who had escaped and left 2 dead guards behind. That escape transformed him from a regional fugitive into a national legend. Afterward, Billy returned to the Fort Sumner area, where Pat Garrett eventually found him. Their final encounter was nothing like the Western stories that came later. There was no public duel and no heroic final moment. There was only a dark room, a sudden gunshot, and a young man who never had the chance to understand what was happening. After his death, sensational newspaper coverage, Garrett's 1882 account, later biographies, popular fiction, and films transformed Billy the Kid into something larger than the man who had lived. The most important myths began to overshadow the truth. Billy almost certainly did not kill 21 men. He was not the mastermind of the Lincoln County War. He was not the legendary bank robber or unstoppable gunslinger created by Hollywood. He was an orphan teenager who entered a violent world, became involved in a political conflict, made choices that brought death and destruction, and became immortal because people turned his complicated life into a simple story. The uncensored reality of Billy the Kid is not that he was the greatest killer of the Wild West. In my opinion, the reality is that he was created by a frontier where businessmen controlled power, law could become revenge, and violence was often presented as justice. But the same world that shaped him does not erase his responsibility. Billy chose violence, he killed, he escaped by taking 2 more lives, and he kept running until Pat Garrett found and killed him at Fort Sumner. Billy the Kid became immortal because the legend replaced the man. And perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is that he was never created by one person or one gunfight. He was created by an entire world of conflict, corruption, revenge, and choices made by everyone who surrounded him.